14 IRGC soldiers died in Zanjan, not in combat, not from an Iranian missile misfiring, not from a drone strike, from an American cluster bomb that was dropped on northwestern Iran during the 63-day campaign, and that sat in the agricultural soil of Zanjan province waiting to be triggered by the next person who got close enough. 14 experienced, specially trained, qualified sapper specialists, the largest single-day IRGC loss since the ceasefire took effect on April 8th. Killed by a weapon that the United States dropped during the conflict, and that is still killing people after the shooting stopped. And here's what I want you to understand about that fact before I get into the question that the reference material is raising about whether this was an accident or something else, because the question of whether it was an accident or a sabotage operation is genuinely interesting and genuinely analytically uncertain. But the fact underneath both possibilities is the same fact. America used cluster munitions against Iran. Over 1,200 hectares of Zanjan province alone are contaminated with unexploded submunitions. The IRGC has neutralized more than 15,000 unexploded ordnance items since the conflict began. 15,000. And the sappers who are doing that work are dying while they do it. That is the legacy cost of this weapon system that no one in the American press is covering as a strategic story. Let me address the sabotage question directly because it deserves honest analysis rather than either quick acceptance or quick dismissal. The official Iranian account is that this was an accident during a routine ordnance clearance operation. Unexploded American and Israeli cluster munitions detonated when experienced demolition specialists were working to neutralize them. That is a plausible account. Cluster munitions are specifically designed to be unpredictable in their secondary fuse behavior. They scatter submunitions across wide areas, some of which fail to detonate on initial impact and become ground-level mines with fuse mechanisms that can be triggered by pressure, vibration, or the specific handling techniques that even experienced demolition teams use. The cluster munition problem is not theoretical. It is the documented operational reality of every theater where these weapons have been used at scale, from Lebanon to Laos to Ukraine. The counterargument, which the reference material raises and which open source analysts are working through, centers on the concentration of personnel. Why were 14 elite trained specialists clustered at a single point simultaneously during an ordnance clearance operation? Standard EOD protocol distributes personnel to minimize mass casualty risk from exactly the kind of event that occurred. You do not put 14 people in the same physical space when working with unexploded munitions. That is not a procedural nicety. It is the fundamental risk management principle that defines how ordnance disposal operations are conducted. The protocol exists precisely because the scenario that killed these 14 men is the scenario the protocol is designed to prevent. Now, here is where I apply the intelligence analyst framework to this discrepancy. There are three possible explanations. First, this was a genuine accident in which standard protocol was violated for operational reasons that may have included terrain constraints, time pressure, or command decisions. Accidents during EOD operations do happen even when protocols are followed, and they happen more frequently when protocols are compromised. Second, the official Iranian description of the unit and its composition is not accurate, meaning the personnel who died were standard IRGC demolition battalion members rather than elite VIP protection unit members, and the protocol violation reflects the stress that a 63-day intensive conflict, followed by a massive contamination clearance operation, has placed on the IRGC's engineering corps. Third, the coordinates and operational schedule of this specific mission were compromised, and the personnel were positioned in a way that allowed a device to be triggered deliberately at the moment of maximum concentration. The third explanation requires a level of operational penetration of IRGC demolition unit communications and operational planning that would represent a significant intelligence capability. Indeed, it is not impossible. Iran is fighting a conflict against two of the most capable intelligence services in the world, and there have been demonstrated penetrations of Iranian operational security at various levels throughout this war. But it also requires a specific chain of actions someone with access to the specific mission plan, someone with the ability to communicate that plan to an actor capable of triggering the device, and a triggering mechanism that was either pre-positioned or remotely activated without detection by the demolition team on site. I am not prepared to call this a definitive sabotage without evidence that goes beyond the concentration of personnel at the time of detonation. What I can say is that the intelligence community will be asking exactly these questions right now, and the Iranian intelligence services will be conducting a counterintelligence review of this operation that will be among the most intensive reviews in their recent history. Because if the third explanation is correct, the implications extend far beyond 14 dead soldiers. I want to give you the specific number that frames this event in its full context. Since the ceasefire took effect on April 8th, IRGC demolition units across Iran have neutralized more than 15,000 unexploded ordnance items. 15,000 in less than 4 weeks. That number tells you the density of cluster munition contamination that the American and Israeli campaign left across Iranian territory. It tells you that the danger does not stop when the ceasefire is signed. It tells you that every day the sappers go to work, they are walking into a field of weapons that are specifically designed to kill the person who touches them and that have already been primed to do exactly that. The 15,000 neutralized items represent the ones they found before they detonated. The one in Zanjan on May 1st represents the ones that find the people first. And across 2,200 hectares of agricultural land in Zanjan province alone, with devices buried up to 3 meters underground, the clearing operation that killed 14 men on its first major incident has months of work remaining before those fields are safe for anyone. Now, let me connect the Zanjan deaths to the broader strategic picture, because there is a dimension of this story that nobody is framing correctly. The United States used cluster munitions in this campaign. That decision is going to be killing people in Iran for years, possibly decades. The specific pattern of contamination in Zanjan province, 1,200 hectares of agricultural land with submunitions buried up to 3 meters underground, is not a military problem. It is a civilian problem. Those fields feed Iranian families. That farmland cannot be safely cultivated until the clearance operation is complete. And the clearance operation killed 14 of the people doing it on day one of the post-ceasefire period. Cluster munitions are banned under the Convention on Cluster Munitions. The United States is not a signatory to that convention. Israel is not a signatory. Iran is not a signatory. The legal analysis of their use in this conflict is therefore not a straightforward war crimes determination, but the humanitarian reality of what cluster munitions do after the conflict ends is documented, consistent, and devastating. Zanjan on May 1st is not a unique event. It is the first visible instance of what cluster munition contamination does to the people, military and civilian, who have to live with it after the bombs stop falling, and it will not be the last. Now, let me address Trump's comment about Iran's leadership, because it connects to the Zanjan story in a way that is more strategically significant than the connection might appear. Trump said on May 1st that Iran's leadership is very disjointed, 2 to 3 groups, maybe 4, and all messed up. He said this while simultaneously saying they all want to make a deal. Let me read those two statements together the way an intelligence analyst reads them. Disjointed leadership that all wants a deal is not a description of a regime on the verge of collapse. It is a description of a political system processing the trauma of 63 days of the most intense military campaign in its history through the normal mechanism of factionalism. Every government that survives an existential threat goes through a period of intense internal debate about who bears responsibility, what comes next, and who should be in control of the decision-making for what comes next. The Iranian government is doing exactly that. The foreign ministry under IRGC is pressing for a negotiated settlement on terms that can be described domestically as a strategic victory. The IRGC hardliners are pressing for terms that go further in extracting American concessions before any Hormuz arrangements are made permanent. The president's office is navigating between them. Trump is describing that political negotiation process as disjointedness. What it actually is is decision-making under the conditions that 63 days of American and Israeli airstrikes created. And the fact that all of these factions want a deal, as Trump himself acknowledged, is the most important intelligence signal available about where this conflict is heading. Iran submitted a new proposal to the United States via Pakistan on May 1st, the same day the Zanjan explosion killed 14 IRGC sappers. Trump said he was not satisfied with that proposal. He said they had made strides, but he was not sure they would ever get there. That combination of dissatisfaction and uncertainty from Trump is a specific diplomatic signal that deserves careful parsing. Not satisfied means the Iranian proposal does not yet contain the specific nuclear concessions that Trump needs to be able to claim he achieved the war's stated objective. But not sure they ever get there is not a declaration of military resumption. It is a negotiator's expression of leverage. You express doubt about the other side's ability to deliver the terms you need, not because you believe it, but because expressing doubt creates urgency on the other side. Iran is negotiating, Trump is negotiating, and the sappers in Zanjan are cleaning up the cluster bombs that the negotiating parties dropped on each other's territory while the negotiations were still 2 months away. There is a dimension of this event that I want to address because the reference material raises it and because it is something I have direct professional experience with. The question of whether insider intelligence compromise contributed to this event. I spent years working in environments where counterintelligence was not an abstraction, but an operational reality, where the question of who inside an organization might be providing information to the other side was a daily professional consideration. And I can tell you that the specific combination of factors that the reference material points to, economic stress on security personnel combined with a demonstrated pattern of penetration by sophisticated intelligence services, is the combination that counterintelligence professionals consider most dangerous, not ideology, not coercion, economic pressure combined with opportunity. That combination has produced intelligence compromises in every major security service in modern history. Whether it produced the Zanjan compromise is a question that the IRGC's counterintelligence directorate is working right now. And the answer to that question will have more strategic consequences for the IRGC's internal cohesion than the deaths themselves. Because 14 dead can be mourned and replaced. A penetrated VIP protection unit cannot be secured again without replacing every person who might have been the source. Let me now address the economic dimension of the IRGC situation because the reference material raises it and because it is the dimension that connects the Zanjan event to the longer arc of the conflict. The IRGC operates an extensive economic empire inside Iran, holding companies, import-export businesses, construction contracts, and the cryptocurrency mining operations that were consuming 2,000 megawatts of civilian electricity until the conflict shut them down. That economic empire has been under severe stress since the sanctions intensified and the Hormuz closure disrupted Iran's oil revenues. Lower-ranking IRGC personnel, the soldiers and junior officers who actually conduct the field operations, have seen their real wages decline as the rial collapsed toward 1.1 million to the dollar. The reference material suggests that economic pressure has made intelligence penetration through bribery more viable. That is a plausible analytical framework. Economic stress on security services does create vulnerability to intelligence recruitment. It happened in Soviet-era intelligence services. It happened in post-Soviet Russian services. It happened in every security apparatus that went through a period of severe economic pressure while maintaining a large and expensive institutional structure. Whether it is happening in the IRGC at the specific level the reference material suggests, meaning junior personnel selling operational coordinates to external actors, requires specific evidence rather than inference from general principles. I am not dismissing the hypothesis. I am applying the standard of evidence that intelligence analysis requires before acting on a hypothesis. The Zanjan event is real. The 14 deaths are confirmed by the IRGC's own statement. The question of whether this was an accident or something else will be answered by the counterintelligence review that the IRGC is conducting right now. What is certain is that the cluster munitions that killed these men were dropped by American and Israeli aircraft during a war that both governments described as a successful military campaign. The sappers who died were not combatants. They were engineers trying to make farmland safe for the families who grow food on it, and they were killed by the weapons that the campaign left behind. That is the story of Zanjan on May 1st. And before I address everything else the reference material raises, I want to state something clearly that the American press is consistently failing to state. The cluster munitions that killed these 14 men are banned under the Convention on Cluster Munitions, which 111 countries have ratified. The United States has not ratified it. Israel has not ratified it. Iran has not ratified it. None of the three main combatants in this conflict are legally prohibited by treaty from using these weapons. But the humanitarian reality of what cluster munitions do to the civilian landscape after the military operation concludes is not changed by the absence of a treaty obligation. The children who will eventually try to cultivate those 200 hectares of Zanjan farmland after the sappers finish their work, if they finish their work, will be at risk from the weapons that American aircraft dropped, regardless of whether those aircraft were legally prohibited from dropping them. That is the long-tail cost of cluster munitions that never makes it into the press conference about what the campaign achieved. Everything else, the intelligence theories, the factionalism, the dolphins, the Starlink user who was beaten, is analysis built on top of that foundation. The foundation is this. The war created 15,000 unexploded ordnance items that the IRGC has been neutralizing since the ceasefire. 14 of the people doing that work died on May 1st, and the negotiations that are supposed to produce a final settlement are still stalled because Trump is not satisfied with the latest Iranian proposal, and Iran is not willing to surrender its nuclear program to achieve a deal that the United States can describe as total victory. The cluster bombs are still in the ground. The negotiations are still unresolved. And 14 families in Iran are mourning people who died after the war was supposed to have ended. The IRGC statement called them experienced, trained, and specialized personnel who sacrificed their lives in the service of the nation's safety and tranquility. That is the official language of a military organization honoring its dead. Behind the official language are 14 actual people who went to work on May 1st, doing a dangerous job that someone had to do because 63 days of American and Israeli airstrikes left 15,000 unexploded items across Iranian territory, and someone had to go get them out of the ground before they killed the farmers and children who live on that land. The weapons that killed them were dropped by a campaign that both governments described as achieving significant degradation of Iranian military capability. The people who died cleaning up the campaign are the most precise measurement available of what significant degradation actually looks like when the press conferences are over and the battle damage assessment teams have gone home and the people who live in Zanjan province try to figure out how to farm their fields again. Watch what the IRGC counterintelligence investigation finds. If this was a deliberate operation, what comes next changes significantly. If this was a tragic accident, what comes next is 14 funerals and thousands more unexploded ordnance items still waiting in the soil of a country that is currently negotiating whether the war that created them is actually over.